Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the School Library Partnerships webinar. I hope you can hear me. If you have any questions or cannot hear pieces of this, please send us something in the chat function of the webinar. We are pleased that you are joining us this afternoon. I'm Lee D'Amico. I'm a research faculty member in the College of Education at the University of South Carolina, and USC has been working with the State Library for a few years on the Literacy 2030 initiative. I hope some of you are familiar with Literacy 2030, which focuses on the goal of improved literacy in South Carolina by the year 2030. And you'll see the homepage is displayed right now if you want to look at what we have done in the past few years, some of the statistics that we have gathered related to literacy specifically, and how we've organized our work around Literacy 2030. We've developed frameworks and structures based on feedback from libraries, literacy experts, and others. And through this work, we decided to look at a continuum of literacy through 4 strands. And those are early literacy, grade level literacy, teen literacy, and adult literacy. And we realize there are overlaps between these strands, and we know many people are working in particular focus areas or across these focus areas, but we thought by spotlighting one area each year, after 4 years, we would have information across the spectrum. So last year we focused on early literacy and developed data points, explored promising practices, held regional meetings across the state, and provided resources related to early literacy, and that's generally what happens before school entry. This year, we are focusing on grade level literacy as children enter school and progress through the elementary and middle grades. We kicked off the webinar series with a Pathways to Grade Level Literacy webinar held in October of 2018, and that is available recorded on the website. Today, we are focusing on school library partnerships, as that's another critical feature of grade level literacy, and we'll feature 2 speakers who will talk about their work related to literature circles, book clubs, and other opportunities to work together between libraries and schools. First, we'll have Dr. Madeline Fletcher talking about her work with literature circles as a school librarian in Greenville County. And then we'll have Madeline Helzer Howard talk about her work with the Beaufort County Public Schools in partnership with the Beaufort County School District. So first, I'm going to introduce Dr. Madeline Fletcher. She has been a librarian at Berea High School in Greenville, South Carolina for 10 years. During that time, she has focused on improving student literacy by encouraging a love of reading among her students. Before becoming a librarian, Madeline taught English and Latin for more than 20 years. Madeline received her BA in English from Furman University, her Master's of Science in Library and Information Science from USC, and her EDD in Curriculum and Instruction from USC in August of 2018. Madeline's dissertation topic was the impact of literature circles on the reading comprehension of English language learners. She based her dissertation on her experience partnering with an ESLL teacher at her school to implement literature circles with a class of emerging bilingual high school students. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Madeline Fletcher, and we're going to turn it over to her to talk about her experiences with literature circles.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I do feel passionately about literature circles. I think they've been around forever, but I believe they're still one of the best ways for librarians and teachers to help students really become good readers and lifelong readers. Lee, if you'll go ahead and turn to the next slide. Dozens of authors have written about literature circles over the years, but when I talk about literature circles, I will be referring to those that were described in this book by Harvey Daniels. This book is called Literature Circles, Voice and Choice in Book Clubs and Reading Groups. Daniels wrote this book in 2002, but it is actually an updated version of a book he published in 1994. So he has been writing about literature circles for many, many years, and I think he's just really the leading expert on literature circles. I want to read to you this quotation that I have on the slide. This is Daniel's definition of a literature circle. He says, a literature circle is a small, peer-led discussion group whose members have chosen to read the same story, poem, article, or book. Every word in that definition is important. We're going to look at these elements a little closer if we'll turn to the next slide. Okay, now here's a list of some of the most important elements of literature circles according to Harvey Daniels. And the first item on the list is the one that Daniel says is the most important, and that is choice. I'm actually going to read you a little something that he says on page 19 of his book about choice. He says, "You can't fall in love with books that someone stuffs down your throat. For reading to become a lifelong habit and a deeply owned skill, it has to be voluntary, anchored in feelings of pleasure and power." So it is important to offer children choice in their books. Without the choice, you really don't have a true literature circle. Another important element in the literature circle is that the groups that you're working with should be small. Daniels recommends anywhere from 2 to 6 members, but he says that 4 or 5 is the optimal number, and I would agree with that. I do think 6 is okay, 6 is workable, but I would not really recommend having 2 or 3 members to a group. That I've tried that, and that really is too small to work, in my opinion. The next element you see here is that the students in the circles should be the leaders. This is really a hard one for many teachers and librarians, to kind of let go of the control of the group. But for literature circles to really work, the children must be the leaders. They need to take ownership of the process in order for it to work. The next element you see here is that literature circles should offer opportunities for the children to talk and to write. Harvey Daniels suggests that students, as the students are reading their books, they should use Post-it notes to mark words or passages that they think are important. And I do think Post-it notes are a great tool when students are reading, children are reading a book. And I would suggest just investing in a bunch of small Post-it notes and passing them out when you pass out the books. But Daniels also suggests that students use what he calls roll sheets. And these are sheets that you pass out that students fill out as they read, and then they bring those roll sheets back to the lit circles to share with them when they come to the next session. And we're going to talk more about these in just a minute. Another important element you see here is social interaction. Learning really is social, and literature circles take advantage of that and really force students to interact with each other. Members of a literature circle have to allow each other to speak, and they have to listen, and they have to ask questions. So it is a very social activity. And finally, and this is actually very important, literature circles are just plain fun. They don't have the kind of anxiety that comes with so many reading assignments. There's no testing, there's no assessment, really, no formal assessment. Students are simply encouraged to read books and to respond to the books that they read. Okay, so I've talked about the major elements of literature circles. I haven't really explained yet how they work. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll see how you actually go about implementing literature circles. I think the next slide didn't make it in, so I'm just going to talk without it. This slide is about roll sheets, but okay, that's fine. Okay. Anyway, as we said, the first thing you need to do is offer choice. So you need to first look at the number of students that you have that you're working with and decide how many books that you need to offer. So for example, say you're working with a group of 20 students. If you want to have 4 or 5 students per lit group, that means you're probably going to have 4 or 5 groups, 4 or 5 small groups. So if you want to have 4 or 5 lit circle groups, then you may offer, say, at least 7 or 8 books for the students to choose from, or possibly more. Now, this means that you have to have a number of copies, at least 5 copies of each of these books. Then you would start by giving a book talk on each book. Depending on your students, I really think it's valuable sometimes to actually read aloud some of each book. Perhaps read the first couple of pages or even the first chapter, depending on the length of the book. That really gives the students an idea of how the book reads. And then give the students some time to interact with the book. Have the students pass the books around or put the books out for the students to come and look at. Then give each student a ballot, and have each student list their first, second, and third choice on that ballot. Obviously, not every child will end up getting his or her first choice, but even third choice is better than no choice. And it does just increase the students' enthusiasm for the whole endeavor. So then, once your groups have been formed based on the book choice, each group needs to come up with a reading calendar. So you've got your small lit circle groups. Within that group, the students themselves will come up with a calendar. And this will be based not only on the book, the number of pages in the book, and the number of meeting times you're going to have, but it will also be based on what they have going on in their lives aside from the lit circle. Try to let the students do this as much as possible rather than you forcing a particular calendar on them, because again, it gives them more choice. At some point, when they're in their circles, you're going to give each student, or the students themselves are going to each take a particular role, and we'll look at these role sheets in just a second. Then, before you do have the students actually dive into their books, you might want to practice the skills, practice the roles that the students are going to be using as they do their lit circles. So one way to do this is to maybe read aloud a picture book, just a short book, and then as a large group, you can go through the different roles and talk about these things in relation to that picture book. You could do this with the short story as well. And that helps the students understand the roles better. Additionally, and this is something I never considered until recently, but at the beginning of each lit circle session, or maybe it's the beginning of some lit circle sessions, you might want to teach what Harvey Daniels calls a mini lesson on some aspect of successful literature circles. Daniels actually wrote a book in the last few years, a whole book on these mini lessons, and they cover topics like asking good questions, or staying on task, or appreciating language or literature, that sort of thing. So these can be helpful, particularly if you think that your lit circles are having some kind of problems with these in these areas. Okay, so now here are the role sheets. These are not the actual sheets, these are the titles of the sheets. Daniels does have copies of role sheets in his book, or I made up some myself that were a little bit different from his in their explanations. I'll be happy to send them to anybody that would like them, or you can just make up your own. But these are some of the basic roles that he came up with. And as I mentioned, every student in the group should have a different role each time. Now there's 6 roles here, and if you have a group with, say, 4, then you might just want to pick 4 of these roles, or you might want to do 4 one session and then 4 different ones another session, or whatever. The roles should rotate every session so that each student gets an opportunity to have a different role each time. So let's look at these. The first one you see there is the questioner. Now this person will bring back questions to the group after the reading for that day. This can be questions about what happened. Maybe the student really does have a question about something that was in the book that he didn't understand. Or it could be sort of a wondering question. I wonder what's going to happen next, that sort of thing. Then you have under that the passage picker. This one, the child will actually pick a passage, maybe a paragraph or a sentence or some passage that he thinks is important for some particular reason. It could be something that was confusing, maybe something he had a question about, or it could be something that he or she just thought was significant, or maybe funny, or whatever. That's similar to the word wizard, which you see over to the right, only this child just brings back actual words. And these can be words that the child did not know, that he didn't understand these words, or it could be words that he thought were interesting or funny or whatever. Above that, you have the summarizer, which obviously just this child summarizes the reading for that day. In the top right, you have the connector. Daniels thinks this one's particularly important, and this one is very interesting. The connector is the student who, after reading the selection, comes back to the group and talks about connections that he or she made with the reading, how he or she connected the reading to his life or her life, or else maybe to something else they've read at some point, or maybe something they've seen on TV. So it could be any kind of connection. But this child makes connections with the reading and something else in his life or her life. And on the bottom, you have the artist. Now, the artist can either draw a picture of some single event in the selection for that day, maybe the most important event, or the artist can kind of function as a summarizer. The artist can draw several pictures depicting all of the most important events in that selection. I used to think that the artist was maybe the least important of all the roles, but I've really changed my thinking on that. As I've worked with students with lit circles, I've seen that for a lot of students, writing down a summary is very, very difficult. But if they can draw it, if they can express what happened with a picture, that sometimes works better for them. And you really do see a lot of growth in their understanding just through their artwork. Now, every time you get in your lit circles, and you should meet regularly. That's another important element, is that you meet maybe every week, once a week at the same time, or maybe twice a week at the same time. But every time you meet together, some student in each group needs to be the leader. Now, the leader can rotate, or you can have the same leader for a while, but each leader will make sure that a different student gets a different role for each session. After a while, Daniel says that you might want to abandon the roll sheets, do away with them. I think that's fine after a while. I would definitely start out using the roll sheets, because these do give your students good direction in how to talk about what they've been reading. The final word I want to say about literature circles is, again, just try to let them work. Try not to butt into the groups. It's very hard to just stand back and kind of observe. If you do want to join a group, you can join as a member. You can take a roll sheet, although I'm not sure I would really suggest that. Try to just kind of to let it happen, because if you have the patience to let it happen, I think you will find that they really are magical.
Okay, thank you so much, Madeline, for that presentation about literature circles. And I've learned a lot over the past year from Madeline's work on this, and just thought it would be helpful as we're thinking about school library partnerships, and even some ways that we could think about doing book clubs and literature circles in different ways. So we appreciate your experiences and you sharing that. And I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk about the next portion of the webinar.
Thank you, Lee. I'm Rebecca Antle. I am the Youth Services Consultant for the South Carolina State Library. I wanted to just say a note about the Literature Circles book. We do have that in the SC Lens catalog, and we are going to purchase another copy for the State Library, so that'll be available for anyone who wants to check it out. Our next presenter is also a Madeline Helzer Howard. She lives and works in Beaufort, South Carolina, and she is currently the Youth Services Coordinator for the Beaufort County Library System. She's worked in libraries since 2011, and when she's not at work, she's reading romance books on her Kindle, drinking tea, doing yoga, or playing her oboe and the ukulele, although assumedly not at the same time. So, Madeline, it is all you now. Let's turn it over to her.
Thanks, Rebecca. I hope everyone can hear me just fine. But my little slides going to come up, I assume? Yeah, I thought it might just take a second. So I work in Beaufort County, and we have 5 branches, and this summer we're going to have 2 bookmobiles. And I started in Beaufort County as the Youth Services Manager for the St. Helena branch, and that's where I kind of started these book clubs. So they're book clubs in the different schools. And I kind of felt a need for the book clubs because oftentimes when we do outreach, I have found in reflection recently that I'm replicating things that the kids are already getting in the classroom, and there's no need for me to do that. Instead, we should be providing services that different that the kids can't get in their school that add to their education. So, when you do outreach to school age, are you providing something that they cannot get from the school? And are the students' needs being met or exceeded by the service that you propose to provide? So in our case, we are offering these book clubs to the different schools, and the kids can be, it's really up to the teachers how they set them up. Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so whenever I propose this to each school, I go through the principal and the media specialist, and it's easier to have like solid options for the people to choose from rather than say, hi, I'm from the public library and I want to work with you, because oftentimes that's just overwhelming. They have to come up with idea, they have to flesh it out, they have to, and then you're there to help them. Whereas if you come and say, I can do this specific thing or this specific thing, and this is specifically how it will help, you're going to have more success in that. So, um, different options that you can propose. I've had book clubs during lunchtime, which are the most fun because the kids get to bring their lunch into the library or into the classroom outside of the cafeteria. I've had breakfast time um, book clubs where the kids come in like the first period of the day. I've had book clubs where the teachers decide that the specials time is the best time. And you want to decide obviously what your group sizes look like, and what grades you're going to do and the reading levels of the kids. So I generally don't like to do any group over like 10 kids, and even that can be too much. In this picture, this is actually half of a group. So that's my children's programmer, Ami, and she came with me, and we book talked a bunch of books, and then half the kids chose one book and half the kids chose another. So it worked out really well. So we had more manageable groups. And generally, I do third and fourth grade. I've done fifth grade boys before, but third and fourth grade is that kind of make it or break it time where they transition from whether or not they're going to stay a fluent reader for the rest of their life. I mean, as far as the reading levels of the students, I really leave that up to the teacher. So in this one, these were kids that were right on the reading level bubble. So they weren't super below reading level or struggling, and they weren't exceeding. And so oftentimes those kids that are right on the bubble are the most at risk for going underneath the bubble because they don't get that extra special attention. And through these book clubs, it gives them a sense of confidence. It's special. They get to come and they get to read and spend time with their friends. And so it makes it more of a fun thing. And in this picture, we were actually reading the graphic novel Sidekicks, we bought a set of them because it's such a fantastic book and the kids all really love it. Next slide, please.
We are working on the next slide.
Okay. So I can talk a little bit about graphic novels. Oh, there we go. So this is the bottom right picture is the other half of that one class that I mentioned in the last one. And it was kind of funny because the girls and boys kind of split themselves up, but it wasn't because it was girls and boys. It was literally by the book they wanted to read. And I think that this group of girls wanted to read The Chocolate Touch by Patrick Catling, which is an older book, but the kids actually really love it. And then we were able to expand on that and talk about King Midas and the Golden Touch and everything. And that was a really fun activity for everyone to do. The other picture was actually one of the first book clubs that I did. And we met during lunch, and you can see that the kids have their trays of lunch on the rug in the media center. So it was just really special. The other picture, they did breakfast. So after they did that, the media specialist would buy them like muffins or Pop Tarts or something. But we read Frindle in that book club. And then these kids were actually readers that excelled. So the teachers at that specific school decided they needed to treat the readers who were doing really well. And so we started with Frindle in that book club, but we actually were able to read chapters outside of book club. So we ended up reading things like Wonder by R.J. Palacio and Candy Makers by Wendy Mass, which is a huge book. Um, and that was a really, really fun book club because the kids were able to take the books home and read a couple chapters and come back and talk, and then we read around. So I guess I didn't talk about how it works when we get to book club after the kids bring their lunch in. I The very first book club meeting, we always bring 3 or 4 books to book talk, and then the kids get to choose. And no matter what age group I'm doing a book club with, we do this. That way, we have control over what books we can offer. So like how many copies we can get of each book and what we can offer that way. So we can make sure we can get the copies, and then the kids still have that choice that Dr. Madeline talked about. That's so important, is having that choice of what they want to read. So we book talk it, and then at the second meeting, we make sure to have copies for all of the students. We either check them out to the students' library card, personal library card, or the media specialist's library card, because we don't have like school library cards in Beaufort County. Or we'll check it out to the Storytime card that we have for our in-house Storytime books. So that's the way we do it. I put holds in on SC Lens for them, and they only check out for the normal 3-week period. But by that time, we're usually done with the book. So in general, we always offer a couple graphic novels and a couple small manageable chapter books. And the kids almost always choose a graphic novel first, and then once they're more comfortable, they'll move on to a chapter book, which is really interesting. So in this current semester, we've just finished Sidekicks with our group, and we just started Hello Universe, which is the Newbery Medal winner last year. And the kids chose that. So we have a group of like 8 girls right now, 8 fourth grade girls at our Shanklin Elementary Book Club. But as you can see on this picture, that's the graphic novels that we've read. We've done El Defo, we've done Sidekicks. Zeta was really fun. So generally, it really helps the kids with comprehension. And I know I'm preaching with that. But for us to bring in the books for a book club, it and then they see that we have comic books, it makes it more fun for them. And they're like, oh, it's almost allows them to have fun while they're reading in the book club. And we'll read around in a circle. So with the graphic novels, we read 1 page per kid. And then with the chapter books, we read paragraph by paragraph. And at the end of each chapter, we kind of talk about what happened in that chapter. Generally, with the chapter books, I will read a whole chapter to start the meeting to kind of get the kids into the story before they start going around into the circle. It just kind of gets them a little bit more dedicated to what they're listening to, and it helps boost that comprehension as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so along with 3rd and 4th and 5th graders, I also do a high school book club, and I've asked the middle school, but I've just not had a response from. I've had responses from the middle schools, but I think that their schedule is a little bit different, and we just haven't been able to establish a book club at the middle school yet. But at the 2 high schools that we do, we actually meet. The kids come before school even starts, which is to me just so impressive. So we have this group of 6 to 8 high schoolers, which is small enough to be a literature circle, which is really great. I love that presentation because I was like, I do a lot of that with my high schoolers right now. And so they meet before school, and we book talk again, like 3 to 5 books, and then they get to choose what book they would like to read. And then they obviously go home and read the books, and then we meet the next month. But the elementary school book clubs, we actually meet every single week. So every Wednesday we'll meet, and they'll be able to bring their lunch into the library. And that consistency is really good, and it's easier for me to remember too, honestly. But with the high schoolers, we do meet just once a month. This is the list of some of the chapter books that we've read with our different books. And you can see it's a pretty big variety of books. We haven't done a graphic novel with the high schoolers yet, although every time we talk about it, we say that like if you're really interested in manga, if you're really interested in graphic novels, we can bring in graphic novels to be an option. So we do let them know that it is an option for them to read. This bottom picture is actually really really cool because the media specialist in pink, she's the media specialist for the school, and she started off at the Kusa Elementary where we were reading The Candy Makers and Frendel. That was one of my first book clubs. So she transitioned from that school to this River Ridge Academy and started the book club at that one, and contacted my colleague Kelly Baxter, who's the um, youth manager at one of our branches south of the Broad River, to start this book club at her other elementary school. So there's an example of a media specialist taking our collaboration that she had at one school and seeing the importance of it, and then moving it to her school with her. So I thought that that was really awesome. And sometimes we sit in circles, and sometimes, like you see in the picture above, one of our schools has like these little cushions, and we sit all over the cushions. We let the kids get comfy and read, and we just generally have a really good time. But this is something again that they don't get in their normal classroom. Most of the kids are kids that are on that reading level bubble, so they can read at grade level, but they're not necessarily above, um, or maybe they're almost there and they just need an extra little boost. I've done it when I first started. It took me a while to kind of get into this method of doing the book clubs. We've found that if you go into a class and it's just like the fourth grade's time to have library, it's not as effective. The kids aren't all dedicated. They distract each other. The group is generally way too large, and they feel like they have to be there. Whereas if they're pulled out special during a lunchtime, during a breakfast time, during a special, it makes it special. They feel chosen. They feel like this is an extra awesome thing that they get to do, and they're more dedicated to reading and experiencing the stories. So at St. Helena, when we did it, I had a whole class of fourth graders, and it was just nobody was really focusing. And then we had a couple readers and then a couple non-readers, and then in that group, I brought all kinds of books, and they got to choose a book to read. And that just it generally didn't it wasn't as successful because they already get that library time, where they choose their own book to read and during the school day. So if we bring special books, we're all reading the same thing. We get excited about it, they get excited about it. It's different from a classroom setting, and so that makes our outreach more effective. um, and I think that's it. The last slide is just my contact information, if anybody has questions.
So Madeline, can you just tell us a little bit about how the program first got its beginnings? Did you go to a media specialist and say, "Hey, I want to try a book club," or did one of the school librarians come to you? Like, how did that first one come to be?
Yeah, so the very first one was I literally just reached out to the media specialists and CC'd their principals. And I checked with my branch manager because I was not a branch manager at that time. But I just reached out to them and said I would love to do a fourth grade or a third grade book club, with your kids. And I had two media specialists that reached back out, two or three, and they were just all about it. And we just developed it together. Um, so the actual first three that I did three different models at three different schools because I generally leave it up to the school to what they need. And so I had the St. Helena Elementary where we were all reading different books and it was a whole class. I had Ladies Island where it was like a group of 6 to 8 boys and they brought their lunch the media, um, into the library, and we read Diary of a Wimpy Kid around in a circle with their trays on tables. And then we also had the one at Kusal where we all sat on the rug and we read chapter books and they took the books home, and then brought it back. So that was a real eye opener to see three different models I had going at the same time to see what was going to work best. But really, I just reached out to them and said, I have this idea. And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So I was
Great.
very fortunate. Yeah.
My other question was, how many schools total are you serving now, and what kind of staff time does that take up for you guys?
Currently, we have River Ridge Academy, which Kelly goes to once a month, and we have both high schools, which one high school is twice a month and one high school is once a month. And then we have Shanklin Elementary, which is every single week. So that takes up an hour every single week, the Shanklin Elementary one. But the other ones generally take 40 minutes a month for one staff member. And then if you add in like the 15 minutes it takes to put the books on hold and bring them in and check them out to the kids, probably like an hour a site for those once a month visits.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So if you have questions that you'd like to turn into the presenters, we'd ask you to put those in using the chat. And then we wanted to address some of the things that the State Library does to support partnerships as well, as we wait for some of those questions to come in. So anyone who's been to any of my trainings knows that we do a lot. The State Library does a lot to try and support collaborations and partnerships. So it's difficult for me to try and nail it down to any one thing. And there's even more that the public libraries are doing with the schools. But I wanted to kind of focus in on just a few examples. We're offering the summer reading and learning grants right now. And a big part of those is finding educational or community partnerships there within your library's local community. And obviously, if you wanted to partner with your school over the summer to do summer reading, that would be a really great example. We also offer the circulating kits and encourage the libraries to use those in conjunction with your school. We get a lot of requests from school librarians and school teachers to use those resources. And we always encourage those school librarians and teachers to go through their library to build stronger partnerships and collaborations that way. Some schools are lucky enough to have all of the resources in the world, and some schools don't. And so we have made those circulating kits available to the schools as well to try and fill some of those gaps. We're also working with several different public library systems to do universal library cards so that students grades K through 12 can have access to their public library resources. So there's a variety of different projects. I know any of you who attended the summer reading wrap-up last year got to hear some really neat stories from libraries who were automatically enrolling the public school students into their summer reading programs. And we're hoping to do that for a lot more of our library systems this year. And I'm sure if people contacted the presenters today, I'm sure that there's a lot more that they could share. Let's see what we've got coming in for questions.
Sure. We have one question about who chooses the students that participate in the book clubs, and I'll leave it to either Madeline or both to address those.
I can address that. Usually I leave it up to the teachers and the media specialist to choose. I don't know the children at the schools that well, and the teachers are the most familiar, and I think they probably consult the literacy coaches as well. But I have no part in choosing the kids, especially at the elementary level. At the high school level, the kids get to choose to sign up for it. That's how we do it.
Well, and it's an interesting point you make, Madeline, about most of the kids who are involved are the ones who are not necessarily reading at grade level. I think everybody in the public library could agree that we get a lot of the readers. I mean, that's who's going to walk into the library are the kids who are already reading, who enjoy reading, who take 50 books home at a time. But the schools see the readers who are struggling, who are a little bit more reluctant. So collaborating with the schools gives us that opportunity to reach the kids that aren't automatically coming into the public library already.
And Madeline Fletcher, how do you work with the teachers, or how do y'all decide who participates in the book clubs or the literature circles?
Well, with literature circles, I've done those with whole classes. So an English teacher or an ESOL teacher will just turn over her whole class to me, for these literature circle sessions. So it'd really be the entire class. Book clubs, we've had book clubs before in the library, and those are just students who choose to join. But with the literature circles, we work with the whole class.
Okay, great. And we also had a question about the circulating time frames, and for Beaufort County, how do you work just within the Beaufort County Library to get the books that you need? And how do you work within the time frames of the checkout?
So generally we try to get books that Beaufort already has a lot of copies of, but if we only have like 3 copies of it and I need more, I'll pull the ones from Beaufort first. I'll put copy holds on them, and then I'll pull from the closest counties and then on out. And then we don't take the books, we check them out all on the same day to the kids, and so that way they all have that 3 weeks circulation time frame. It generally works out that we get them all within the week, and all books have that 7-day hold time frame. So that's the way that we kind of handle those circulation time frames. And once the 3 weeks are up, if they still need it, we try to renew it. And if it doesn't renew, it just goes on back, because that's the way the system works.
And then there's another question about, do the elementary students take the books home, or only the high school students, or how does that work with this books going home with the students?
So if the book is checked out by the student's individual card, they are allowed to take it home. If the student does not have a card, then it's up to the media specialist, if it's on the media specialist card, whether or not it goes home with the child. But then that media specialist, because we don't have like school cards, assumes responsibility for that book. So generally that doesn't happen. And if we check them out on our Storytime card, we just bring them back and forth. And the only time I've ever had elementary level kids take the books home was with that one group of accelerated readers, where they were above grade level and they were able to go. I mean, those kids were bringing chapter books that they were reading not for book club to book club to talk to me about. So they were reading multiple books at a time, but those were checked out on their individual library cards. So that's how we handle that.
Right. And those are all the questions we've received at this point. If you want to continue the conversation, we would welcome emails with additional questions that we could continue this conversation about book clubs and literature circles. There is also information out there about online book clubs. Different groups. Duke University and their TIP program has put out a lot of now publicly available to teachers or librarians about how they've structured some of their online book clubs with specific questions and suggestions for books. So those are options, and we'll put links up for those if you're looking to do something online during the summer, things like that. And again, we focus particularly on book clubs and literature circles. We know there are many other ways that schools and libraries can partner, and we would love any suggestions or examples of things you all have done or you know about that would be helpful to disseminate through Literacy 2030 and have as a resource for other libraries and schools. And to let you know, we have 2 additional webinars coming up in our series this year on grade level literacy. The next one will be family engagement. How do we engage families, parents, caregivers, others, community members in literacy work? And then final webinar in the summer will be on summer learning or in summer literacy, preparing for your work in summer 2020. So we know that you've probably got a lot planned already for 2019, but toward the end of the summer, we're going to, again, take suggestions, resources. So again, if you have examples of summer reading programs that are successful or innovative, things that have worked well for you, please pass those along so that we can include those on the Literacy 2030 website and think about including those in our webinar about summer learning. So with that, again, I want to thank you for attending. Do you all have any? We're good. We will follow up with an evaluation form for you to give us feedback on this webinar and any other suggestions of things you might need or could help you in your work with grade level literacy or any of the other 3 areas of literacy. And this is being recorded, so we will post this as soon as we can get it up on the Literacy 2030 website. So again, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to suggestions and ideas or resources you have that would help other libraries in this work. Thank you very much.